itchy. Yeah.
Maximum freedom. Read.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom. Read Rothbard.
Hello and welcome to the Read Rothbard Podcast. This is the special Olympics episode. And Robert needed just a few more moments. Oh, there he is. How you doing, Robert?
Oh, angry as always. You know, annoyed, angry, happy. It's a jumble of emotions. I'm happy to be sharing them all with our loving listeners.
Well, I do appreciate that. We did have a pre-call, and we had a very emotional pre-call, so hopefully we can carry that on into this special Olympics episode of the Read Rothbard Podcast.
Yeah, this is our first special episode, so it's like a deal. We're dropping it because it makes no sense to release this in 3 weeks. The Olympics will be long over.
Yeah, I do like having a few in the can, but the Olympics are going on right now, and I plan to edit this over the weekend and have it posted early next week while the Olympics are still going on. I think that would make a hell of a lot more sense.
Yeah, and as opposed to a couple weeks' time, you listen back to it and go, okay.
Right, but the rest of our stuff is timeless. Timeless stuff.
It's timeless, but still. Be a little bit on point.
Indeed, sir. So we had a list of topics to go through. I sent you an article. You sent me about 10. Yeah. And where do you want to start, man?
That's a good question. There's a couple of different directions and things that bring to mind. First of all, and this is a huge discussion. We don't need to get into it. The whole press for equality and the celebration of equality and the idea that everybody's equal and everything should be distributed equally, when in fact nothing is, nor should it necessarily ever be, and definitely shouldn't be distributed equally by force of violence. It's funny how we want everything to be equal in certain areas but not equal in other areas. So we want all this gender equality and whatever, and we want pay equality. But we celebrate inequality with something like the Olympics. We celebrate inequality when we praise some new Nobel Prize, someone with super intelligence or some super athletic ability, or when we watch a Miss America pageant or some Miss Beauty contest. We're celebrating the beauty of these people and not the beauty of some other person. Inequality is everywhere. The talents are distributed unevenly, and time and the way you choose to spend your time and develop what talents you have is up to each individual person. It's just interesting how, on the one hand, we want everybody to be equal under the law, so a certain amount of equality, but then we're like, but inequality is super awesome, and it is. So the ridiculousness of trying to make everything equal and the hypocrisy of championing and celebrating inequality here and not in other places. Socialism tries to do away with, monetarily inequality. We're going to take all the money from the rich and give it to all the poor, and everybody will be equal. And the horrors that causes. You can only have to look at socialistic places around the world right now, even though the United States is horrifically socialistic. But if you look at Venezuela right now, it's a nightmare. Anything else to add on inequality, Daniel?
Well, I have a few comments. You mentioned the Nobel Prize and it being inequality is regard to who is smarter. And I'll just point out that Paul Krugman has won a Nobel Prize.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily evenly distributed. I mean, it's not exactly accurate. I mean, Obama won a Nobel Peace Prize. So, it's not necessarily appropriate who they're given to. But just the idea that we would celebrate, inequality in almost all realms of life, but then somehow demonize inequality at other times just seems a tad bit odd.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, without inequality, there wouldn't be sporting events. There wouldn't be a division of labor. there wouldn't be the desire or the opportunity to aspire to do other things or the incentive to learn anything or to try hard at anything, because if everyone's going to be equal, why bother? You know, like I can just be a fat, lazy slob and I will get whatever the most fit, most intelligent, most hardworking person will get. I mean, doesn't that make sense? You know, like if you could just get all of your desires without effort, wouldn't you opt for that? Right.
There's no incentive. Where's the incentive to strive, to achieve, to create? And it goes towards our argument against the guaranteed basic minimum income, where if all your needs are satisfied, what incentive do you have to create and achieve and produce? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and what's to say there would be very much to distribute if everyone was under the impression that they could get whatever they wanted or needed out of the system, no matter what they contributed as far as effort.
Sure, and that's illustrated very well in Atlas Shrugged with New Millennium Motor Company. Is that right? I keep remembering.
20th Century Motors.
20th Century Motors. Yeah, it's very well illustrated in that, where there's just no incentive for the best among them to produce if they're getting paid the same as the sweepers, you know, whatever. But,
yeah, it reminds me of the guy who works or runs Gravity Payment Systems in Seattle, and he made big news in left liberal media circles about guaranteeing that he would pay everyone the same wage or at least $70,000 a year. And, you know, so even if you're fresh out of college, newbie, don't know anything, or if you've been around for a long time, sweeping the floors or running the marketing department, you're going to make at least $70,000. Well, you know, people who have been there a long time are going to make a whole lot more than that. And so a whole bunch of people jumped ship right away. And he went through a bunch of other, you know, issues and concerns. I think there was some press that tried to salvage his reputation after that. But the basic idea is that if you have no incentive to strive harder for something, if you expect things to be handed to you, then you're not going to work as hard.
That's right. So, the press for equality, when you celebrate inequality, you rightfully should. It creates all kinds of problems.
I'll bring up an article it's a small book actually. It's called Egalitarianism as a Revolt Against Nature by Murray Rothbard. And he talks about how the striving for making everybody equal is not natural, because people, human beings, are born at different heights and have different intelligence levels and different physical capacities and all across the board. And like you were saying earlier, people can choose to develop them further or they can squander them. And for everyone to expect the same result, no matter what deck of cards they were dealt or what hands they were dealt, and no matter what they do with that hand, is against nature in its very essence.
Right. Yeah, you could be born with the most amazing athletic ability, but if you don't do anything with it, you're only going to get so far. So a guy like Michael Phelps, who's just set the world record for the most gold medals ever won or something like that, his workout routines are insane. The guy trains like nobody's business. He also has an amazing amount of natural talent. But, he's worked very, very hard to get where he's at, and rightfully so. He's at the pinnacle of a thing in the world. You don't just walk onto that, just like right off the street.
Yeah, indeed. So it's a bit funny to me that you're bringing up that the whole celebration of Olympics and sport in general is a celebration of inequality. And the thing that's funny to me is that there are several memes and short videos on the State Book that are all about how the Olympic announcers and how they treat women compared to men is unequal. And so there's all these like pseudo examples, and I'll post the video down below. But I watched it. There's 6 or 10 or something like that, and virtually none of them were offensive to my reckoning. And it's just bizarre that they're trying to say that in this competition of who is the best at any given thing, and granted it's a whole state-sponsored love fest for government, but to say that there's still inequality and that's a problem, they're not treating everyone equally, is ridiculous. Like, just one example was the fencer who's a Muslim and wears a hijab. And apparently there were some people who were saying that, hey, she should be the one carrying the American flag in the opening ceremony because, we should show that, Muslims are part of the American culture, blah, 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 rather than Michael Phelps, who is the most decorated Olympian of all time, even before this Olympics started. And so there were calls to have him stand down and let this fencer, who has never won a medal, and just happens to be a woman and happens to be a Muslim and happens to wear a hijab, stand in his place holding the American flag, which is, I wouldn't find it to be a great thing, but, it's like a quote-unquote honor.
Right.
And it's ridiculous. I'll just leave it at it's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. I don't understand. It seems to be that, gender is the thing now, even though everything is inherently unequal.
Isn't gender not a thing? Isn't that the thing? That gender is not a thing now?
Right. But they inherently will give more time, and they only have so much amount of time, right? So they try to make a backstory. They pick a certain number of people who they think are going to do well, and they film a little backstory for them so that we care about these people, right? They don't have enough time to devote to every single athlete in the Olympics. That would just be insane. So they try and make a star, right? So we care about them. We'll watch them. We'll learn their name. And we'll get some sort of national pride about it. Oh, isn't that lovely? But yeah, that's how they get advertisers. That's how the system works. You get people watching because they care about the people who are doing the thing. And then advertisers invest in those people and give those people advertising contracts, and we watch the advertising, and that's how it pays for the show. And it's inherently unequal. There's no such thing as giving equal time to every single athlete. Are they just asking for, well, we want 12 female stories and 12 male stories? You go by the number of people that are going to do well so that you can talk about them and then celebrate their wins. Anytime people are asking and complaining about unequal time being spent on certain things, you are spending that person's money for them. The people who are making the show are picking the athletes that they think are going to do well, that are representable enough on television, they have enough personality, enough charisma, enough looks to be on TV decently enough or whatever. They're making that choice based on what they think people will want to watch. If you say, well, you have to randomly and arbitrarily put this person in a hijab and make this person the face of U.S. Olympics or whatever, you're spending somebody else's money. Anyway, we could talk about that for a while, but we got a bunch of other points to talk about the Olympics on. That's just the beginning.
Yeah, well, before we move on, I have a few more things. Speaking of unequal, it doesn't necessarily mean it's unequal in any particular direction. Like the U.S. women's gymnastics team just won the gold medal. Mm-hmm. Have you seen much about the men's side? I haven't.
Well, to be fair, I don't have television, but yes, I'm sure there's probably not nearly as much coverage.
Yeah, and as far as like individuals, sure, I've heard Michael Phelps' name quite a bit, and I haven't been watching much. But the only other person I've heard is Katie Ledecky, if that's even her name, and she's a female swimmer. And then there was some other swimmer who was calling out a Russian swimmer for having some banned substance in her system 2 years ago, and it's a big deal or whatever. But I don't understand what the issue is when it comes to demands for equal time or equal whatever. When this person, my personal perception, who's not actually watching the Olympics but just seeing some coverage on the peripheral, is dominated by the women other than Michael Phelps.
Yeah, all the stories I've seen have all been about the women's gymnastics team or the women's swimmer, or Michael Phelps. And I'm sure we'll get more stories maybe like about Usain Bolt and whatever when that happens. But yeah, I would say that I haven't seen anything about the men's gymnastics team or anything like that. And I don't even know. That's not
maybe
even
they haven't happened yet.
All the other sports that nobody cares about, except that I would. I mean, I would be interested to know the archery, how that happened, but I mean nobody else cares about that.
And another quick anecdote is because the women's soccer team is now playing, somebody in Congress or the Senate has now proposed a bill to make them have equal pay to the men's team, and that's now going through the chambers of government.
Great. Fantastic.
But what they fail to understand is that it's all dependent on how much revenue is brought in, right? Like how many people are watching men's sports versus women's sports, and what in the estimation of the presenters of those sports, do they have the best opportunity to do well, gain viewership, gain ad revenue? And they're making those judgment calls. They're making entrepreneurial risk. They're making these assessments based on past history and what they think the trends are going towards. And so it's very telling that the women's sports, like the WNBA, like even in Seattle, they've won, 2 championships? They still only open the lower bowl of the stadium or the arena because
they can't sell it out.
They can't sell it out. So what does that tell you about the amount of revenue coming in? And that's just ticket sales. That doesn't include ad revenue from televising the games or merchandise, jerseys, whatever. I mean, they pale in comparison to a LeBron James or a Tom Brady or whatever, And so it's just ridiculous that they demand that there's equal pay when they seem to not see that there's a correlation to how much revenue is being brought in versus how much they will receive in their compensation for helping create that revenue.
Right. Yeah, and it happens to be a fact of life. It is just a fact that men are more about competition and sports than women are. Women have different interests, and that's not everybody, of course. There are plenty of women that are interested in sports, and that is reflected in the amount of people that do watch the WNBA and other female sports and that sort of thing. But if you were to do some sort of a gender breakdown about the number of people who watch sports and talk about sports and spend money on sports, that is hugely slanted in the men's direction. And don't even come back with me about women. I know a lady that super loves sports and whatever. You got to admit, it's mainly a men's phenomenon because men are the traditional competitors. They're the traditional warriors and soldiers, and they're the ones that were out hunting. And it appeals to us on a very primal level, and where I think it's less so with women. Women were traditionally the nurturers, the family, the children watchers, and that sort of thing.
Right, and even if that is the reason or not, it plays out in who is actually participating and who is actually creating the revenue and who is actually the customer. There are reasons behind it or not. It's predominantly men who are watching sports, who are spending their money on the sports or on the memorabilia or, et cetera. And so it's a market-driven thing. Now, granted, there are many issues that are not market-driven in sports, like the NFL is a non-profit organization protected under some tax code, blah, 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 and Major League Baseball has some other bullshit. And there's the collective bargaining agreements with unions, and there's salary caps and all these other issues that make it very very non-market. But, I guess if it's their own thing, then I guess they can sort of decide what they do within their own realm. But go ahead.
Except, I'm just going to add one little thing to what you're saying, is that stadiums are very expensive to make, and teams, and in Seattle we're keenly aware of this, generally hold cities as hostages. Like, you have to build us a stadium or else we're leaving, that sort of thing. Many of the stadiums around the country were built by taxpayers, even though the owners could afford them.
Well, and even if they couldn't afford them, because they could shuffle off the cost to a taxpayer, then they got built, Right. And so you ended up, if you were living in that area, you ended up paying for it, whether you watch that show or whether you support that team or not. So enjoy that. Yeah, well, I think that's a good segue into one of the articles you had about the building of Olympic venues and the corruption and all of that. You got an article there for me, buddy?
Yeah, I've got, there are some articles. Here's an article from Time Magazine. It's called "It Wasn't Always So Expensive to Host the Olympics. Here's What's Changed." And it's just talking about some of the costs to build these stadiums. Talking about Montreal in 1976, it built this giant, big experimental architecture type stadium. And it's called the Big O, Big O-W-E. It's budgeted at $145 million. It came in at $1.2 billion, so almost 10 times the cost. And it required so much debt funding and post-games repair that the total cost was $2 billion. Like in the same year. It was budgeted at $145 and it came in at $2 billion at the end when it was all said and done. And that's all, they're borrowing that to be paid off by, future taxpayers, future people who haven't even been born yet. And how are these things getting built? These are giant contracts that are probably being handed down. I don't have any article in front of me, but this is kind of famous, the kind of corruption that goes on with the mafia and the Big Dig in Boston. And it's made famous on The Sopranos, where Tony Soprano had these no-bid contracts on the New Jersey coastline, where it always goes massively over budget. It's just completely no bid. It takes way too long. So it's just a way for there to be a massive government graft and to grease a bunch of wheels and make some buddies in the private sector. And the governments don't care how much they borrow. These politicians will come in, they'll borrow billions of dollars. What do they care? They don't have to pay that cost. They reap the benefit politically. They get to make all kinds of connections and grease a lot of pockets and make a lot of friends. And then they're out a couple years later. It's just a way for governments to loot the taxpayer. And that's not even to say, that doesn't even take into account, let's say, the federal money. For something as big as the Olympics, a lot of it gets paid federally. So you've got money coming in from Maine to pay for a stadium in San Francisco, as an example. There's also, the Salt Lake City Olympics or whatever, or the LA or Atlanta or any one of these places. The point is that you're paying for something that you're never going to see a benefit to. You're up in the other side of the country and you're paying for something that you'll never go to, that you'll see maybe on TV, maybe, but you're definitely not going to see any kind of economic benefit for your money. So even if you could make the argument that the Olympics coming to a city benefits, in the short term at least, the vendors around the area, the construction companies building the places, a lot of the costs that are paid by people that have no benefit seen to. On top of the idea that even if you have the opinion that democracy is somehow moral, these cities, these city councils, just pretty much make these packages and vote and make these proposals to host these Olympics. So the general voters don't get any say in this. They'll just say, yeah, we're going to host the Olympics, and this is fantastic, and it's going to be great for our area. Some people think that. There's an article here. Does hosting the Olympics actually pay off? It's in the New York Times Magazine. It's dated 2 years ago. So it's way exact, but it's basically about the same thing. It's about Brazil. But there are people talking about how, in the favelas, do we actually see any of this benefit? They've got all kinds of stadiums for soccer cups in Brazil. And they built for the World Cup, this is similar. It's government building these big things for these big events and then them lying fallow, essentially, afterwards. So they'll build these big fancy stadiums for the Olympics or what have you. This is for the World Cup. They built the Arena Amazonia, a $300 million building designed to look like a woven basket. And it's built in this rainforest city where the professional team regularly draws fewer than 2,000 fans a game. So talk about never making your money back. You build it for this one big event, and then it just goes basically unused because you have these giant venues. And who can use them?
Not the WNBA.
Not the WNBA. You can open up the bottom ring for the WNBA, but they build these giant stadiums for huge crowds. And then, what, is the local high school team going to play a game? And you can fill up, a couple rows, maybe? It's just ridiculous, honestly. I'm just kind of ranting here. I'm going off all these things. I mean, feel free to jump in when you want here. We can save for the last bit how it's just one giant tool for government nationalistic propaganda. A lot of these articles I'm looking at are talking about how it's fantastic for the feelings of the peoples of the countries, and you get this nationalistic pride, and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, well, I want to hit on the stadium thing where you're saying that people in Maine are paying for stadiums in Los Angeles or Atlanta or, hypothetically San Francisco if they were to host the games. That reminds me of a few chapters of Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson, where he talks about the Tennessee Valley Authority Project, which most viewers or listeners probably won't be familiar with, but it's a system of dams in the Tennessee area that are a government project used to create electricity for that region. And he goes on to make the argument that the money that went in to build those dams was taken from people in, say, Washington or Louisiana or Florida, and they don't see any benefit out of that. And the money was taken from them, therefore they could not have used it in the ways that they saw best fit, and they had less funds available to meet their own needs. And so it's just kind of, it reminded me of that, and I'll post a link to that book down below because it's one of the great starter books for this way of thinking: free markets, Austrian economics, libertarian philosophy.
That's a great point. I was going to make that point also in a slightly different way, but yeah. All this money being spent is all money that could have gone towards other better uses. It's all taken away. So it's like, not only is it going to this, but you lose that economic benefit of best use. So here's just a quick rundown of some of the costs of the more modern Olympics. Some of these actually record profits. I'm skeptical on those numbers and who actually gained that money, but I'll try to be fair here, at least according to this Wikipedia article. The Beijing Summer Olympics in 2008 cost $44 billion. At least that was the budget. Final operating budget. Total cost is not listed. I don't count on Red China coming out with accurate numbers anytime soon. Same with Sochi, the most expensive Olympics to date. $51 billion operating costs. Final budget cost, the actual total cost, profit loss, taxpayer contribution is not listed. The Rio de Janeiro current games, we're seeing a wide variety of numbers. The Wikipedia article lists an $11.6 billion cost to taxpayer contribution. I guess I have to have to wait and see what the final costs are. But the current budget is around $4.6 billion, but the actual costs are estimated to be closer to $20 billion. And all that money you don't get to see what that money could have been put to best use on.
Right, it's the seen versus the unseen. Yeah. But even beyond that, like the Rio Games and the Sochi Games, and probably throughout the history of the games, you always hear stories about how the venues aren't quite ready. They're in a mad rush to get them done, and there's all these issues and shortfalls and cost overruns. And so anytime there's a situation like that, where there's government contracts involved and all this money, you can only imagine how much corruption is allowed to seep into that situation. Like there's some articles I'm seeing where in Sochi, Putin's personal friends were awarded contracts totaling over $15 billion. And in one instance, one of the stadiums used for hockey, a hockey arena, they determined what the market price would have been versus what that was actually paid. And other contractors would have built that same arena for $33 million less than what was paid.
Right. And one of the big pushes that the government officials will constantly harp on, and an excuse as to why a city should host it, is this Keynesian idea of spending its way to prosperity. If we just build all this stuff and spend all this money, it's really going to drive the economy. If you could talk to that a little bit, Dan, it would be fantastic.
Yeah, so give me another angle on that real quick, and then I'll chime in.
Well, just that the idea of, let's just throw money at a thing, and the government spending is the engine that drives the economy, like the idea of the New Deal, or any kind of big government program is just some fantastic thing that is just going to spur on economic growth, that the government is actually the source of economic growth.
So the Keynesian miracle.
Yeah, the Keynesian idea.
Yeah, so it's essentially taking funds that are in everyday people's pockets who would have those funds to satisfy more and more of their needs, being stolen from them and used in usually a waste hole type project that has all sorts of graft and corruption, similar to what we were talking about with the Olympic venues. But essentially what you get is a project that is seen and that's celebrated, and that's considered economic growth. But what is not seen is the stuff that would have been purchased by those people had they had more money to satisfy needs higher up on their list. It's like similar to Bastiat's broken window fallacy. Like everyone says the kid who broke the window is actually spurring the economy in his local area, because now the guy with the broken window is going to have to pay the glass maker to go and repair the window, and therefore money is going to be circulating throughout the economy and everyone's going to be better off. But what's not seen is that the guy whose window was broken now has to spend that money on repairing a window that he already had. And so now he can't afford to buy new shoes from the shoemaker or a new suit from the suit maker or whatever. So he's not getting better off. He's actually losing the value of a whole window. And whatever was next on his list of wants or desires or needs are left unfulfilled.
Yeah, buddy.
And I'll just bring up one Bastiat quote. He said, "When plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in a society, over the course of time they create for themselves a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it."
Beautiful. And that's what you see in the world today. You got a whole bunch of legal violence. This is everywhere. And it's given a fresh coat of paint, a bunch of lipstick, and people are told that's the way it is, and that it's good, and you're supposed to get all teary-eyed and wonderful about it, and you're supposed to get a gun and go fight for it and kill somebody else for it and die for it, and it's real disgusting. And the things like the Olympics, you cannot watch the Olympics without being inundated with nationalistic propaganda. Every winter, when they win a thing, they get their national anthem played. You get a flag behind them. You get a uniform that is almost entirely flag-based, or at least color-based to the flag that your country represents. And you get a bunch of people crying and how it's all possible only through the government and whatever. And if you think that the Olympics is some sort of a wonderful, hand-holding, international, peacekeeping type of a thing, then it must be good, and governments must be good that are participating in it, and they're all fantastic and wonderful, and just ignore all the violence that it took to bring it about.
Yeah, and that angle is played up so much in all of the commentary and all the stories. They're like, oh, they're doing this for their country. They're swimming for their country. Oh, the glory of the country. They're doing the gymnastics for the country. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And maybe now here you could talk about the medals that they actually get, Daniel, and what happens to the athletes afterwards.
Yeah, sure. That was an article I sent to you earlier today. I read through it briefly, and I'll post it down below. But essentially, they were talking about the compensation that Olympic athletes get from their country when they win a medal. And it's kind of funny because 100 years ago, back when the the present-day Olympics restarted.
The modern Olympics in 1904 or 1898 or something like that. I forget what it is.
Yeah, I think it was 1904.
Yeah, right.
They were solid gold medals. And over time, of course, similar to the Roman Empire, they chipped away at the metal content in their quote-unquote currency. And so now you're at a point to where the gold medals, out of roughly 600 grams total weight, only 6 grams or 1% are gold. The rest is silver. So the gold medal winner and the silver medal winner had a 6-gram difference in the amount of metal content, which is probably just enough to cover the outside of it.
Yeah, the plating on the outside sounds right.
Yeah, and then they do win a monetary award as well. In the article, I think it listed gold medal winners get $25,000, silver medal like 15, and bronze like 10 or 5 or something like that. But these are awards from the government, and yet they are taxable. So it ends up that the Olympic athletes only get about 60 or 61% of that award, and it leads one to wonder, why bother? Why not just give them 60% of $25,000 and not bother with the whole taxation bullshit? Which leads one to wonder, why do any government employees pay or file taxes? Why don't they just get paid what they would have been less the tax? And, I mean, for that matter, why do they get paid at all? But, we're for the maximum freedom thing, and, I'll let you pick it up, man.
Yeah, so I guess it's worth noting that the numbers you were talking about were for the United States athletes. Other countries, some offer zero. Some offer no additional bonus. Like the UK, Sweden, and Norway don't get any extra money. Singapore, apparently, offers $753,000 for a gold medal. India, $160,000. China will throw cash, luxury cars, even new homes for its athletes. Italy, $185,000. Russia, $61,000. So, these countries are willing to pay their stolen loot to these athletes as, for propaganda purposes, to show the glory of their national system, I suppose. there's a certain amount of nationalistic, tribal rooting that goes on. I don't know if people actually root against other countries. Maybe back in the Cold War they did some more. I don't know. But there's a whole lot of nationalistic, yay, we can do it kind of crap that goes on. And that's not to say that, hey, yay, you can do it and your individual achievement isn't great. I'm totally for individual achievements. Let's not say I'm not. But the propaganda value of a gold medal or any kind of medal whatsoever is apparently good enough for these governments to pay out money for as a way to espouse the superiority of their particular nation and their particular government, I suppose you could say. It's all very disgusting.
Yeah, it does seem to be a big stick contest between the major countries like the USA and Russia and China, right? Like it becomes a big deal, the medal count, right? The overall.
Right.
But I do want to swing it back to the amount of money that the U.S. pays the winners, just because in the article they mentioned that it's been that same amount, the $25,000, $20,000, and $10,000, or whatever the numbers are, for a long time, and that, quote-unquote, inflation has eroded the value of the award, end quote. And I thought that was pretty funny because it just makes it sound like inflation is just this naturally occurring thing that, it's just, they really need to up this award because it's not worth as much as it used to be. But let's not discuss what inflation actually is or what causes it, because it's just a naturally occurring thing. It's like clouds or rain or trees growing. It's just inflation.
There's just nothing you can do about it. Right. Natural as the tides.
Just this thing that happens.
Right. It's not the Fed pumping money into the system. It's not just printing money off the reams. I pretty much end my rant with just the whole love fest for government. If this was a private thing that private athletes wanted to get together and, see who was the best, hooray, go for it. And you just happen to be from this part of the world and you happen to be from that part of the world, and we see who's best and we can celebrate inequality and how hard I tried and what my genetic gifts were and fantastic and my skill level, hooray. But when it comes with all this horrific price tags and it comes against the wishes of the citizens, I don't want to have to pay for this. It becomes an immoral, violent act. And to put this pretty picture on it, that this is all wonderful and people holding hands and international cooperation crap, it's just what is this veneer built upon? Blood and violence and theft. Indeed
it is. And so this is a very timely episode. It's our Special Olympics episode. It's not going to be posted on a Friday. We haven't even given this a number because it's just going to show up on our site in the next couple of days and be timely. Yeah, for once. For once we'll be timely. But we also have some product to sling. So, Robert, you want to walk them through what they could win if they select the right amount of dollars to send to us? What prizes will they win? Wait a minute. We've got products? We do. We do have products. We've got mugs and T-shirts and hoodies. And, we've got mugs and T-shirts and hoodies. And can I say this? Wife beaters available for consumption, purchase. That's the proper term. It's not offensive. We've got the brand new wraparound mug. What's it called? It's called the Baller Wrap. Baller Wrap. Yeah, that's a good one. And then we've got the Maximum Freedom hoodies, tees, and the white beater. And then, are you saying that there's a contest? Yeah, the contest is you send us a certain amount of dollars that is commensurate with the amount of dollars it costs to purchase that product plus shipping and handling, and you will win said product. It's like eBay, but a buy it now version. That's amazing. That sounds like an amazing contest. Oh, it is. Sounds like one that's very easy to win. It is. Just my take on it. Let's see how many winners we can get, because right now we've sold 0. So any winners are most appreciated. You get an honorary gold medal. With not even 6 grams of gold. You get 0 grams of gold. 0 grams. It's a no prize. If you're familiar with what one of those is, it's a big old fat no prize. There is one other thing I wanted to mention is the readit.me. We'll be running a special, and this is timely, to where you can actually get a lifetime membership to the service for, I think it's $250. So rather than paying the monthly fee or the annual fee, for a limited time, and it's a good thing this is timely, you'll be able to purchase a lifetime membership, which has access to well over 100 books. So they've already done all of the synopsis and the videos and audio and all that stuff for us. So that's pretty cool. And so I'll have a link to a special page on this episode that will be for that limited time and lifetime offer. Special link on the page below. Limited time.
Excellent.
So why don't you give us an update on what's going on with you, and unless there's something else you want to bring up, and then we can start to bring this special Olympics episode to a closing ceremony.
Yeah, so the closing ceremony, what I've been up to isn't really a pro. I've just been working on my books, baby, bringing it to it. There are other topics that I definitely want to discuss, but they're not suitable for this episode. There's a whole website you sent me called Government is Good. And I really want to – I don't want to bring a whole lot of attention to it because I don't think it's worth anybody really looking at. But there's so many terrible arguments in it, I feel like someone has to respond to it. And then there are some, dare I say it, some hypocrisy in the news. I want to talk about a guy who was arrested for having a thing and another lady who was arrested for wearing a thing, and the vastly different responses that were brought about. One was a white guy who was carrying a plastic toy gun, and another was a lady who was carrying a backpack and had a hijab on. And the responses were very different. And I'd like to talk about the inequality under the law of those responses, not necessarily in the law, but in the social reaction also. So hopefully look forward to those episodes. If that doesn't come about, well, yeah, that'll have to come out in the future. That's right.
Yeah, it's going to be a ways out because we've already got a few in the can. So this episode's going to show up, and then we're going to have a few more episodes that happen before this one, and then all the stuff we're talking about now will become relevant then. I think I've just twisted my eyes and my head and my groin. I don't know what happened there.
That's right. So look forward to that, hopefully, if we don't get sidelined, sidetracked, and start talking about something else entirely.
And now I'm cross-eyed.
Just like Walleye. Yeah, so that's been good, Daniel. Thank you for this episode, buddy.
Yeah, well, I hope our viewers appreciate the special Olympics episode. It doesn't have a number. It's not going to be on the schedule. It's just going to show up in the archive and on the website and on the state book and all that stuff. So thank you, folks, for joining us. We do appreciate it very much, even though we realize it's just a handful, but it keeps us going. So thank you very much.
That's right. And I feel better. I was angry, and I vent a little bit. So I feel good. Thank you.
The Chipmunks. CHIPMUNK. We're the Chipmunks. Guaranteed to brighten your day. Do 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 do.